Good afternoon and welcome to today's installment of the Boost Your Skills webinar series, where we enlist the advice of specialist experts in order to help you make the most out of your university experience and to acquire the skills to help you succeed and develop both professionally and on a personal level. I'm Siddharth, and joining me is Jenny, and we are your Boost Your Skills team. Our guest speakers today are Beth Wood and Andy Barker, who co-authored an Unlock You, which was shortlisted for Business Book of the Year 2020. Beth is a wellness expert focusing on mindfulness and cognitive training to reduce stress, while Andy is a certified performance coach, trainer, and author with broad experience of corporate senior management. Today's event is in webinar format, so you won't be able to turn on your cameras and mics, but we would still love to hear from you through the chat function. This is a safe space with no judgments being passed, so please feel free to ask any questions without fear or worry. If you're still anxious, feel free to message Jenny or myself anonymously, and we will pass it on. The webinar will consist of a 1-hour session followed by some time for Q&A. Please send any questions into the chat box and we will attempt to get through all of them. This event is being live streamed to our YouTube channel, so don't worry if you missed anything. We'll be sharing a link to the video and slides after the event. And finally, thank you to all our attendees who pre-submitted questions. We're going to have a very short focus exercise to start things off. We would like you to join the Mentimeter poll by going to menti.com, logging in using the code shown on your screen, and tell us 3 things that cause you to lose your calm. We've got a few going already, and as you can see, Man City was me because I support Arsenal, and at the moment they are giving me a little bit of stress. Not very confident in my team, as you can see, but the big one for me more than City, I think, was deadlines, especially when I was at university. I think no matter how much I tried to stay on top of things and be planned, as soon as a deadline approaches, if I'm not done with my work, that was it. So I don't know, Jenny, was it the same for you?
Yes, I was terrible with my deadlines. It was almost like I wanted to be more nervous. So I used to leave everything to the last minute, which was awful. And every time I did it, I'd say to myself, why have I done this? And then do exactly the same thing again next time. So yes, I was definitely, the deadlines one was a big one for me, but I think it was self-generated, definitely.
Yeah, I think deadlines, assignments obviously along the same thing, but I think especially as the final date came along, it was just a different story. And I don't know, I just never got over it. And even now, I guess in work, sometimes I see a date and I'm like, oh, have I finished everything? And even if I have, it throws me into complete whack. So yeah,
we've got some good ones, and I think so. Coursework's definitely on there as well. Assignments, the weather has popped up a couple of times, and I think that's a big one at the moment. So we were just saying how it's getting colder, so it's also the clocks have gone back, so I'm sure everyone's had at least one conversation about how dark it is in the mornings and in the evenings now. So yeah, that's definitely something, especially with the vitamin D levels dropping. What else have we got on there?
Exams.
Yeah, exams, huge one.
Yeah.
And if anyone can't get onto Mentimeter, just pop it in the chat and we will talk about that as well. Like we said, no judgment. It's not like we're going to be sort of picking out and saying, why have you feel like this? It's there's so many things that I think everyone has as a common thing that they feel stressed about. So don't worry, we're not going to judge you. So yeah, I think given that we've got quite a few students on here, there's dissertations, exams, deadlines, coursework, assignments. Oh, and we've got cost of living as well. Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah.
Definitely makes sense, that one. Well, good news. We've got people here to help you. So this is perfect to have those. You come to the right place to get sort of answers on how to deal with some of this. I'll just stop sharing my screen now. And yeah, over to you, Beth and Andy.
Thank you very much. So I'm Beth Wood and Andy Barker, and today I'll be doing the talk, and Andy is working all the slides, and then after the talk we'll stay on for the Q&A. So as Jenny said, please write any questions down that you have in the Q&A box. I'm going to ask you a couple of times as well to write something down in the chat function, but it would be really good if you had a pen and paper as well. As we get to some of the exercises, I'll just give you the kind of, for some of them, I'll give you the outline of them. so that you can go away and do them in more time when we finish the session. So Andy and I co-founded Mind Fitness in 2017, and we work with a wide range of organisations to drive improvements in mental health and well-being. And then in 2019, we were commissioned by Pearson to write Unlock You, which is the book, which is why we're here. And as Jenny said, you know, we were really lucky that it was Siddharth said, it was Business Book of the Month, and for a couple of months in 2020, and then entered into Business Book of the Year, which was really excellent. We really hope that Unlock You is inspiring and motivational, but actually it's primarily a practical tool to give you practical techniques that you can use to be more calm and more confident. And as the book says, in 10 minutes a day. And as we go through today, we'll talk about exactly how that can work. It's like a personal trainer for the mind. That's what our publisher kept calling it as we were writing the book. So Unlock You fuses essentially two things. That's mindfulness and CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. So I don't know how many people here have experienced CBT, but essentially what that does is it teaches you to challenge and to change your unhelpful beliefs. And sometimes that's incredibly hard to do because you've had them a very long time, and you'll probably instinctively defend them, even if you don't realize that you're doing it, don't mean to. So how we use the mindfulness is this: because mindfulness teaches you to be reflexive rather than reflexive, so you can reflect upon something, it buys you that space of time in which you can make those bigger changes. So it buys you that little bit of time that will allow you to stop instinctively defending those old beliefs and to bring in something that's more helpful and more constructive. We do use it as a tool on its own as well to bring down anxiety, and I'll talk about that more as we go through. And we draw on neuroscience. We talk about science a lot, and what we do is we use the neuroscience to help us to understand how the brain works, and then we look at using or optimizing its functionality in order to stop the self-sabotage, to stop getting in our own way. So in the whole book, Unlock You, there's right at the beginning, there's in the intro, there's a whole page of benefits. But for today, in this sort of short section, I'm going to be concentrating on three, and they are reducing anxiety, building resilience, and unlocking potential. So we'll go through each one of those sections, and I'll probably talk for around sort of 15 minutes on each one of those. So starting then with reducing anxiety, and I'm going to ask you a question first. So please jot this down on your sheet of paper, and also write it into the chat if you'd like to. And it's this: how do you see stress? If I asked you to describe or define stress, what would you say? What would you write? Just have a minute to think about that. And then, as I said, if you'd like to write that into the chat, you're very welcome. It's a really interesting exercise. And sometimes if you do it again in a few months' time, you might write something quite different, which is also interesting. The definition that we use in Unlock You is where I'm going to sort of start this bit. And it comes from Professor Stephen Palmer, who's one of the leading stress consultants. And he says this: stress occurs when perceived pressure exceeds your perceived ability to cope. So just have a moment to think about that word, perception. It's incredibly important in terms of stress. To a very large extent, if we believe that we're going to be able to cope with the stress that's coming our way, then we will. If we believe that we have the knowledge of tools that will help us and techniques that will help us to cope, and we trust in them, it gives us a really important sort of fighting chance in being able to do it. It's a bit like the very old Confucius quote, which I think Andy's going to put up now, which I love. The man who says he can and the man who says he cannot are both right. You know, believing that you can, especially in terms of dealing with stress, is really important. So I'm going to start just by talking about our fight or flight. I'm sure everyone here knows all about fight or flight, but essentially, if you went in through the ears and through the eyes, you'd come to two tiny pieces in the brain, well, about an inch big each side, which are called the amygdala, which you might have heard of. You can see the amygdala on the slide, just lit there in red. And the amygdala has two jobs to do. So in everyday life, what it does is it passes information, essentially sensory information, up to the prefrontal cortex. But in stressful situations, times of threat or danger, what it does is it instigates our fight or flight response. And what happens then, which is the really key thing, is what you can see on the bottom half there of the slide. Once the amygdala has instigated fight or flight, it stops passing any information up to the prefrontal cortex, which is, you know, we've all had that experience of being in an exam and our mind goes blank, or an interview or presentation, however well we've learned it. And it's because the fight or flight has kicked in. And, you know, in our modern life where, you know, we don't need that extra adrenaline, particularly to fight mad wildebeest or run away from them. It's likely that our stressful situations are going to be the times when we really need to think clearly, decision make, problem solve. And so finding good techniques that work for you, that will get you quickly out of fight or flight and into a place where you can do your best thinking, is absolutely key. So that's kind of our starting point in the way that we look at stress. But before I give you any of the actual techniques, I'd like to just think about how we hold our stress. And we think about something called a stress container, a metaphorical stress container. We all have stressors, which you can see there coming in at the top. And then down at the bottom, you can see the tap. So we have the stressors coming in. You might decide that your stress container is, say, 50% or 60% full at the moment, something like that. And then the tap at the bottom is all the healthy coping mechanisms that you have. So all the cognitive and mindfulness techniques that we'll give you today, but also good sleep, nutrition, exercise, contact with family and friends. All of those things are your healthy coping mechanisms. So I would say on your piece of paper, just draw a quick little sketch of the stress container. And perhaps at the end of the session, you can take some time, you know, give yourself sort of 15 minutes to do this really well, and write out where you think the line is for you at the moment, how full you think the stress container is, draw a line across it, and then right at the top, all the stressors that are coming in for you currently, what's causing you to be stressed, and then make a note at the bottom of what your healthy coping mechanisms are. And I would say as well, just think about how effectively you really use them. You know, I tend to put in things which I maybe haven't done that often. So, you know, it's worth just really, you know, being honest with yourself about how effective those mechanisms are. And probably one of the most important things in terms of resilience is always knowing where you are with that stress container, always knowing how full it is at, you know, any given time. And all of the techniques in Unlock You are designed to enlarge that stress container, not so that you can have more stress in it, but so that it buys you a little bit of space at the top, a little bit of contingency time. You know, you might think you're absolutely fine around the 80–90% mark, but then something unknown happens, you know, like when COVID came and lockdown and everyone's stress levels, you know, went through the roof. But if you can keep it around the sort of 50–60, it buys you a little bit of time so that if something you haven't expected comes in, you can, you know, adapt work out ways to open the tap at the bottom or lessen the stressors coming in at the top. And it, you know, you just have a little bit more time to be able to do that. So always try and know where you are with your stress container. In terms of bringing the level of the stress container down, and in terms of dealing with fight or flight, mindfulness is one of our sort of key tools that we use. So I'm going to give you the definition of mindfulness that we use, which is bringing your attention to the present moment in order to experience life more clearly and more fully. So bringing attention to the present moment to experience life more clearly and more fully. We're very lucky to be living in a time when it's very easy to prove the benefits of mindfulness. When I first started out in it, you know, these were not there. But since the advent of MRI scanners, you know, we can see under a scanner what the benefits of mindfulness are. We can show what works when someone does a mindfulness exercise. So as I said, bringing down anxiety is really key. But other benefits are boosting focus and concentration, which are obviously very important with this audience, and also boosting engagement, motivation. There's lots of research going on at the moment between the links of mindfulness and motivation, which are really interesting. So in terms of the science, we have around 60,000 thoughts a day. I think in our book, I'm Not Cute, which came out in 2019, we said 60,000 thoughts a day, roughly. That is quite contentious at the moment because the way that people measure those 60,000 thoughts are changing. But say it's 60,000 thoughts a day. What's really interesting to know is that only 5% are spent on the task in hand. Isn't that incredible? You know, we have no idea what we could achieve as a species if we could get it to, you know, even 10 or 15. The rest is noise. So in mindfulness, we think of the rest as noise. The two most common kinds of noise are past noise, where we keep going back over and over things that have happened in the past, not to learn from them, but just because we're caught up in that. And future noise, where we create little mental movies about potential futures. We're not mind readers. We don't know what will happen, but we create these little mental movies. And the more we do it, the more it's likely to head increasingly towards worst case scenario. So with both of those, you know, what happens is that one automatic negative thought, Andy and I call them the ants. One automatic negative thought leads to the next, which leads to the next, which leads to the next. And before you know it, you know, you're down the rabbit hole, you've lost 10 minutes and you're feeling pretty rough. So it's really important to have techniques that you can use before that happens. So as soon as you start to recognize that that's happening, a mindfulness exercise is brilliant to pull you out of that. We're going to do one mindfulness exercise today. And the one that we're going to do is image breathing. So I'd like you just first to get yourself comfortable. So if you can, I don't know what you're sitting on, but if you can sit with feet flat on the floor, that's absolutely brilliant. With mindfulness, it should always be alert relaxation rather than sort of slumped relaxation. So spine straight is great, or as near to it as you can. So straighten the spine and then soften the muscles around it is the sort of key. That's brilliant. Arms, it doesn't matter where you put them, but it's good if they're level with each other. And before you close your eyes, I'm going to just pull a picture onto the screen. So I'd like you just for a minute just to have a look at the sea there. Just feel the sort of comfort of the sea. And now if you close your eyes. So I'm going to give you an image to focus on, and we're just going to do 4 breaths. And as we do that, if you breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, and all the time you're doing it, just focus on the image that I'll give you. And if any other thoughts come into your mind, just gently let them drift away. Don't punish yourself for them, doesn't matter, but just let them drift away and bring your attention back. So I'd like you to imagine that you're staring out to sea. And as we breathe in, the wave is going to come towards us on the beach. And as we breathe out, you're using your breath to push the wave back out to the sea. So 4 breaths, getting ready. Breath in and breath out. Breath in and breath out. Breath in and breath out. And breath in and breath out. And in your own time, just opening your eyes and coming back to the present moment. So we've done only 4 breaths, and that's because it only takes 4 breaths to bring down your heart rate, and at least start, and for some people totally bring down your cortisol level. That's your stress hormone, which is pretty incredible. You know, there's almost no times in life where we can't buy ourselves enough space to take 4 breaths to get ourselves back into a place where we're going to be thinking our best think. So, you know, just always really be aware of that. And I'm going to give you a slide of a gazelle in the savannah, because if a gazelle has outrun a predator, managed to survive, then within literally a nanosecond, their heart rate and cortisol level, stress hormone, will be as if the race had never happened. Quite amazing. Unfortunately, with human beings, it doesn't work like that. What happens with us is that we undergo a stressful situation and our cortisol level rises. And then we have another stressful situation and it rises again, and another and it rises again, until it's risen so far, but incrementally, so we've not necessarily even realized it, that it's at a position where it would, you know, it's going to get in the way of mental and physical health. So it's really important to have times, I would say, through every single day, that you press the clear button. You know, for example, if I'm working from home like today, you know, that sort of dividing line between working day and off into leisure, definitely do something so that you don't bleed the stresses from one activity into the next. But the same actually when you're going from one task to the next, or one lesson from the next. It's really, you know, if you can press that clear button, and maybe just, you know, have a moment when you get off the off the webinar to write down when in the day you most need that clear button. You know, there are definitely 2 or 3 times, I'm sure, that most people would know that's actually a time for them to be careful. So just prior to the webinar, within the last few days, a few people pre-submitted questions. So before we move on from anxiety, I just want to address one of those now. And that was a question about how to reduce social anxiety. So I don't know from the way the question was worded, you know, how extreme a difficulty that is, whether it's something that's causing concern or whether it's actually social anxiety disorder, which is sometimes called social phobia. So I'm going to sort of talk about both. Social phobia or social anxiety disorder is very much on the rise at the moment, and has been actually since, you know, halfway through lockdown. Really interesting. With all anxiety disorders, it's where the body doesn't take you out of fight or flight, or doesn't easily take you out of fight or flight. And what can happen with social anxiety, which perhaps you know already, is that, you know, avoidance syndrome kicks in. So it might be that you're experiencing a lot of anxiety in social situations, but it could also be that you realize that you're not taking yourself anymore into the social situations that you wish you could. So I would say, you know, if you have a social anxiety disorder and it's really causing you trouble, then definitely go to a GP, go to your GP. But social anxiety can be addressed with all of the, as can all anxiety disorders. A GP may give meditation, but will probably recommend talking therapy. we will do an awful lot of more intense versions of the things that we're doing here today. But definitely mindfulness will help hugely with social anxiety, as will 2 or 3 of the cognitive exercises that we're going to do later on in the session. So coming into our second area then, which is building resilience. And as we go into this one, I'm going to do exactly the same as for the last one. I'd like you just to take a moment to write down, and you can put it in the chat if you'd like to, what you think resilience is. How would you describe or define resilience? There's some really good ones coming into the chat. Yeah, I love the bounce back one. I think so, I can't remember who. There's one of the writers talks about bounce back ability, which is really fantastic. Yeah, no, there were some very overcoming difficulties, being able to cope with adversity. Yes, they're all really good, really good definitions. We find, as we've sort of been working in organizations for quite a long time now, that there was very much a kind of old school definition of resilience, which was the old sort of man up and get on with it kind of concept, and then the much more the new style resilience, which is embraced by the mental health community, which is based much more on flexibility and actually having real connection with the external world. I would say that one of the things that's important to start thinking about is acceptance. A powerful part of resilience is knowing what is and what isn't within our control. You know, if we can only change what is within our control. If something isn't within our control, we actually have to accept it. We might not approve of it, but we have to accept it. And then that leaves us much more free to, you know, give our time and our energy, our attention to those things that it is within our power to change. And how we do that, how we build that kind of resilience, comes from the idea of neuroplasticity, which I'm going to just talk about. I'm sure quite a lot of you will have heard of neuroplasticity. So we used to think, science used to think that once the adult brain was formed, that it pretty much couldn't change. And it's only been sort of 20, 25 years where we've realized that actually we can continue to change our brain until the very end of our life, which is amazing. So brain has billions of neurons, and they're connected by neural pathways that the messages go between. And whenever we think something new, we build a new neural pathway. And whatever we think about most becomes the strongest or most robust neural pathway. And that's important to know, because our brain will always take that robust route, given half the chance, because that's our default position. It's the route of least resistance. So I'm sure everyone knows that if you've tried to give up something like smoking or something like that, you know, your smoking pathway is like this, your no smoking pathway is a spindly little path over here, and it takes you about 6 weeks of really feeling uncomfortable to make that your route of least resistance. This one never goes away, which is quite interesting to know. It stays as a little pathway. So using, you know, neuroplasticity means that we can change ourselves, we can change what we think, we can change what we believe, you know, to a very large extent. That means we can choose the person that we want to be. Definitely, you know, the closest thing to magic that I've ever come across. But it does mean that it takes practice and it takes persistence, and you have to give it those 6 weeks of time if you're going to change the way you think about anything. You can, however, speed it up a little bit or make it a little bit easier using something called adaptive behavior. So adaptive behavior is a process of adopting a practice of small but continual change. So, you know, human beings are generally very much creatures of habit. we'll, even small things, we'll tie our shoes left and then right, or we'll put the milk and then the tea, or the tea then the milk. There are probably roads close to where you live that you've never traveled, and adaptive behavior is taking yourself out of that. Just jot down the number 3 and write adaptive behavior. And then at the end of this session, try and set yourself the challenge of changing 3 things, big or small, as soon as you can after this webinar, and then just keep them going. Just get yourself into the habit of doing new things. Watch a video that you would never have watched, different kind of music or something that you would never normally do. It can be really small things. Your brain then gets used to building new neural pathways. That's the important bit. It then gets much better at embracing all kinds of change, and importantly, more able to cope when a real crisis happens. So adaptive behavior is a really important part of any process of change. At the very center of all of our resilience work is one premise, and we're going to put that on the slide on the screen now, and it's this: our stress and disturbance does not depend on the situation or event, but on our response to the situation. Some of you may be familiar with this already. Our stress and disturbance doesn't depend on the situation or event, but on the way that we respond to that situation. In other words, we can choose the way that we respond to any situation. It sometimes doesn't feel like that, but it is within our control. And we can tell this by thinking about something called the 100-person rule. So if we put 100 people in a room and they'd all been divorced or they'd just been made redundant, every single person is going to respond in a different way. The redundant group, you might have somebody that's over the moon because they can set up their own business, to someone that it is literally the end of the world. They're going to lose their house, the job, their reputation, everything, and everything in the middle. And that will depend to some extent on circumstances, but to a very large extent, it will depend on mindset. We can choose the way that we respond. In the full version of Unlock You, we go very deeply into something called the ABC method, which comes from rational emotive behavioral therapy. For today, what I'm going to give you is 3 sort of shorter, simple techniques that you can use to start to work towards making sure that you respond in a more positive or productive, constructive way, even when it's a really challenging situation. So the first technique is this, and it's called change your demands to preferences. Changing demands to preferences. I love that picture. So we all place really heavy demands on ourselves. The language of demand is must, have to, should. I doubt most of us get through a day without saying, I must do this, I should do this, he should have done this, or whatever it is. We place them on other people as well. So it's trying to lessen those demands and substitute it in for preferences. So the format of a preference is, I would prefer that ... but ... So to give an example, I should be able to cope better in this present situation. And then you might change it up for, I would prefer to be coping better in this present situation, but I accept that the changes come really quickly and I'm catching up as fast as I can. So you just lessen the pressure on yourself. And actually you can get good with this really quickly. And it's quite fun to practice. I was a bit obsessed when I first did it. I was sort of going around everywhere saying, I would prefer that my dinner wasn't this cold, or I would prefer that the train was not 3 minutes late. But it just gets you into the practice of doing it, and your brain starts to work instinctively in that way. And I have worked with people in the past that literally all we've done for a whole week has worked on, demands and preferences, and it has started to shift things for people. It's a really simple but a really effective technique. The second one is reducing the awfulizing. So we all have a tendency to imagine that things or situations are worse than they are. Now, obviously, there are situations in our life that are genuinely serious, but alongside those, there are an awful lot of more trivial situations that we give an awful lot more time and attention to, and certainly a lot more worry and concern than probably is deserving. So it's just saying to yourself, with every situation, how awful is it really on a scale of 1 to 10? You know, something like losing a phone or missing a meeting can seem like a 9 or a 10. But actually, if you set it against the events in Kyiv at the moment, it's probably a 2. You know, so it's just really saying to yourself, again, it's about perception. It's about changing the perception. So I would say just make a little note. And if you can, at the end of the webinar, jot down all the things that you're concerned about at the moment, and then give them a number. How awful are they really on a scale of 1 to 10? Because not only will it actually make you go, oh my goodness, why was I worrying about that? But it will also allow you, if you do have something that is a 9 or a 10, genuinely, to make sure that that's where you're giving your time. That's where you're giving your focus. And our third technique that we're going to look at is called catch and throw. And that comes from CBT. And again, like the reducing awfulizing, it's about changing perception, about finding a way to tell a different story, essentially. So all you do is when the automatic negative thought or the negative thought of any kind comes into your mind, you catch it in your hand as you say it out loud. Then you turn your hand and then you throw it, saying the different story. So to give an example, you might say, Henry ignored me by the lift, he must hate me. And then you turn it round and you throw it and you say, Henry didn't speak to me by the lift. I wonder if he's struggling at the minute, perhaps I can help. You know, so you're just getting into that habit of doing it. And again, you know, I've done work with people where we've just concentrated on that for a few days, and it has had, you know, very quick effects. So that's the end of our second section, moving into our third now, which is unlocking potential. So Andy and I both, you know, believe that we all have a huge amount of potential that we don't use, that's kind of become buried under the debris of our stressful lives. And so, you know, we not everyone, but a lot of people have the kind of sense that they could do something more, be something better, be someone happier. And so it's really about doing two things. It's about clearing that debris, and certainly Unlock You is about doing that, and all the things that we've already done so far today. And then it's about bringing that potential through and, you know, getting it to the surface and recognizing it. So we're going to start off by thinking about how we can reframe a negative mindset and push it towards a more positive mindset. You know, because of neuroplasticity, you know, we know now that it, you know, we can change not only what we think, but what we believe. And, you know, the negative things that we believe will be having a profound effect on you. There'll be thousands of them. We all have thousands of beliefs, both positive and negative, you know, that you're probably not aware of, you know, more than a tenth of them. And they'll be having a particularly damaging effect if they are negative beliefs about yourself. And so we're going to do just a little bit of work around that. We use a little technique that's moving from inner critic to inner cheerleader. So Andy's going to put a slide up, but what I'd like you to do is to actually draw 2 circles on your sheet, with inner critic on the left and inner cheerleader on the right. Perhaps it's actually better to write the inner critic and the inner cheerleader above the circle so that you leave all the circles blank. And in the left-hand one, the inner critic, I'd like you to think about the negative self-talk that you use. You know, almost everyone uses negative self-talk. You know, it's the things that we tell ourselves that we can't do rather than tell ourselves that we can do. And I'd like you to just write one thing into that inner critic circle. I'm just going to give you a moment to do that. And then what I'd like you to really try to do is to put in the inner cheerleader a positive version of it. So if I said for my inner critic, which is definitely true, you know, up to the beginning of lockdown, I would certainly have said, I am absolutely useless with technology. You know, that would have been in that box, definitely. You know, I am not at the stage where I can say I'm great with technology. But I can certainly say I'm up for learning about technology. I love learning about technology, and that's genuine now. So it's important to remember that you don't have to move in one big step. If you're going to write something which there is no part of you, you know, would actually believe it, don't write it. So if perhaps you've got something really quite serious in the inner critic, you know, if you've written in the inner critic, I hate myself, there is no way in one go you're going to get to I love myself, you know, but maybe in that inner cheerleader, you could write, I was actually okay with my sister's children on Tuesday. You know, it doesn't matter what it is. You can take as many small steps as you need to do to get from that inner critic to inner cheerleader, but it's a really great exercise. And with everything that we're doing today, it's just remembering that, you know, just because you think something doesn't mean to say you have to believe it, let alone act upon it. You know, and we don't acknowledge that nearly enough in our lives. So the inner critic and inner cheerleader is really about increasing our self-value. So in Unlock You, we don't talk about self-esteem, we talk about self-value. And that's because to estimate, which is what self-esteem is both relative and conditional. You know, relative to other people, you know, comparing ourselves to all the people we see, for example, on social media, you know, happens all the time. Or conditional upon the grades that we're getting, the job that we have, the car in our drive. And that makes us incredibly vulnerable to external events. You know, for example, if we value ourselves depending on the job that we have, and then we lose the job, the redundancy situation we talked about earlier, you know, then our value is suddenly plummeted. You know, that's how, you know, stockbrokers jumped off buildings in the Wall Street crash. You know, it's really important that instead of that, we start to encourage a self-value that's built on unconditional self-acceptance. Really important, unconditional self-acceptance. And I'm going to do to talk about a couple of questions that came in and give a little exercise on that. But it's remembering that it isn't about, you know, a lot of people ask, you know, but we need to be self-critical. Absolutely. It's not about silencing that critic. You know, you need to be able to note when you need to change direction to course correct, but it's about stopping that critic from attacking you personally. And, you know, it's a very big difference. So I had two pre-submitted questions. One was on, you know, how can I stop comparing myself to others? And one is, how can I silence self-doubts? And both of those are around the idea of unconditional self-acceptance. So I'm going to just talk through briefly one of our favorite exercises. It's in the book, Unlock You, and it's called Big I, Little I. And all you do for this is perhaps do this now on your paper if you can. Just draw an oblong. So it's as if it's a big I, a capital I with lots of space to write in the middle of it. And then your big I, which you're going to write across the top, is any negative statement that you have about yourself. Quite often we have kind of overarching negative statements that are impacting and really limiting our self-belief. You know, for example, I worked with somebody at one point that said, you know, I'm a monster because I left my first wife. And that was the overarching statement. And then inside the capital I, after this session, take as long as you can doing this, fill it up with all the positive things that you actually are. You know, I'm great with my second wife. I drive the kids to school. I walk the dog. I recycle, you know, literally whatever you can to put into that. Because how we change our beliefs, it's through rationality. We need to see the evidence. You know, what we're not doing is we're not trying to think about pretending the glass is half full. We're about trying to see that it is half full, just acknowledge what is actually there. And big I, little I is a really good exercise to do that. And I'm just going to also mention, sort of related to those two questions, imposter syndrome, which again, I'm sure a lot of you will have heard about. So that's a pattern of behavior where people doubt their accomplishments, and it's accompanied by a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. And what's really interesting is around 70% of us will experience imposter syndrome at some point in our lives. And actually, those people that are high achievers are much more likely to experience it. It's really interesting. So, you know, we've worked with CEOs many times who have achieved incredible things and are still, you know, plagued with imposter syndrome. But, you know, all of the exercises that we're doing are useful for addressing imposter syndrome. You know, use the mindfulness to settle the fear first, and then try to tackle the doubts by looking at the evidence, by thinking rationally and seeing what the evidence is in that situation. Very important. And I'm going to finish this sort of section on unlocking potential by looking at compassion and gratitude. So compassion, the whole ethos of mindfulness is having a compassionate and non-judgmental approach to life. You know, and the science behind compassion is extraordinary. We're actually organic computers. We have about 100,000 chemical reactions every second, which is amazing. And every emotion that we feel is induced by a chemical, or usually a compound of chemicals, moving through our body. So, you know, we've already talked about the stress hormone cortisol. There are a variety of happiness chemicals. For example, there's dopamine, which is sort of spiky high happiness, which you get when you eat your chocolate or your Amazon package arrives. And then there's serotonin, more contentment, happiness. You know, Buddhist monks have very high level generally of serotonin. There's oxytocin, which we all sort of, you know, went through lockdown without, which you get when you hug a person or stroke a dog, kiss a child. So what we're trying to do when we change our thinking from negative mindset to more positive mindset, and it's never going to be completely positive, but more positive mindset, is you're sending a different set of chemicals around your body, essentially. And in terms of compassion, it's really interesting because, you know, when we perform an act of compassion, we have a dopamine hit that's about 3 to 5 times as high as from the bar of chocolate, which is, you know, is really interesting. You know, we've all known for ages, haven't we, you know, how important it is to help other people and feel like you're making a difference. But now the science, you know, is in, we know why that is. And finally, gratitude. And then I'll move into a very tiny, quick conclusion. But Gratitude is the #1 ant repellent. If you remember, Andy and I call the automatic negative thoughts the ants. And that's because your mind, it's scientifically impossible for your brain to feel compassion and hold a negative thought, feel gratitude, sorry, and hold a negative thought at the same time, which is amazing. So it really is your #1 tool for changing that perception, for allowing you to see that the glass is half full. So at the end of this webinar, I think it'd be brilliant if you could spend a little bit of time perhaps thinking about 3 things that you're grateful for, and then take that on to look at 3 people who've played a positive role in your life for whom you are profoundly and sincerely grateful. And then, at any time, if none of the above exercises that we've done today are working, just think of, one of those, and it will at least buy you the time to get yourself back into a little bit of a better place. So coming into the conclusion, I just want to briefly touch on happiness. Happiness is not a myth, and it's not something that we should relegate to children's stories. We think better, we perform better, and we are both mentally and physically healthier when we're happy. And we're a lot better at forming and sustaining relationships. So it's, we're so conditioned in the West to think that life should be a struggle, and that if it doesn't feel impossibly hard, that we're just not trying hard enough. And that is absolutely, not the case. So, try, all the techniques that we've talked about today and that are written in the book are essentially about becoming more calm and more confident, but also allowing yourself to celebrate the successes when they come. We get to the end of a project, and instead of celebrating it, we just go, oh, sigh of relief, and on to the next one. Try and actually acknowledge our achievements and allow ourselves to feel the gratitude and the happiness. So in Unlock You, it finishes with a 6-week follow-up process. I'm only going to mention it very briefly today. In the book, it is exercises that you do every day, and then a few exercises that are done on a weekly basis. And the whole premise of it is that you can do only 10 minutes a day and you will feel better. The reason why that is true is because alongside the 10 designated minutes, you are, of course, with your magnificent brains 24/7. So as soon as you start to become aware of everything that we've talked about today, you will be making those changes all the way through the day, sometimes consciously, and sometimes they'll just start to happen for you. So I would say, from what we've done today, if you wanted to do the 10 minutes a day, perhaps doing the mindfulness exercise in the morning, and then the gratitude in the night, just before you go to bed, also help with sleep. And then through the day, just being aware of what's happening with your thinking, being conscious of your thinking, which is not most of the time, and just whenever you need to, do a demand to preference, or reduce the awfulizing, or do a catch and throw. And you will start to feel and function better in a very short period of time. So that's the end of the talking bit. So happy to go on to the questions now. Jenny, are you going to feed me questions? Are you?
Yes, we'll read them out as they come in. We did put the link to the book in the chat earlier, but I'm going to pop it in again just in case anyone missed it. But that takes you to the book, which is reduced by 15% at the moment. Yay, so if anyone is interested, I think it sounds like it's a really good book, so I'll be definitely having a look at it. And I actually feel calmer already, having done some of the exercises along with you. So I think that's really useful. That's just 4 breaths. Yes, is amazing.
So they did some research in Canada a few years back, and they looked at people for both examination standards and interviews for some people at work, some people at university. And obviously the more mindfulness you've done, the better. But they looked at people that had done 8 months, 8 weeks, 8 days, 8 hours and 8 minutes. And even the people that had done 8 minutes did better than the people that didn't. Yeah.
That's
amazing.
amazing. Everyone's being a bit quiet on the chat with questions. So I think we'll just, I have a question. It's possibly a little bit random, but what's your thoughts on the superhero pose that people probably have heard of through maybe Grey's Anatomy, but I think so I was talking to someone about it and they thought it wasn't real because it was on Grey's Anatomy, but
yes, no, it is real. So Andy, it's Dana Carney and Amy Cuddy, isn't it?
That's it. That's
so have a look at a TED Talk by Amy Cuddy and Dana Carney. Yeah, but definitely. So we've really talked today about how we can use our mind to help our body and make us feel calmer, but actually it works the other way around. Almost everything is bidirectional. You know, we can use our body to improve our mind as well. So if you stand, this is absolutely true, I promise you, not just on Grey's Anatomy, that if you stand in a closed pose, it's for most people it's around 90 seconds, then you know, it will start to flood stress chemicals through your body. If you stand, the essence of it, so you know, we do superhero. We have teams of actors working in schools, and we do superhero pose with them. But actually, the openness is the important thing. So standing up, but being open, and you will allow the positive chemicals. It will take 90 seconds again for positive chemicals to be going through your body, and you will feel better. And it is really interesting, Jenny, because when we first started really looking at that, we were just about to hire somebody, and I went into the waiting room, and everyone that was waiting for an interview was sitting like this, because that's what we do when we're scared. And I kind of wanted to go around going, no, sit up, you know, open your arms. But yes, so yeah, just being aware of that, of our bodies and the way we hold them, definitely. Yeah.
Great. And that's perfect for an interview or presentation, because like you said, that you sort of have this instinct to protect yourself, don't you, and do that, and that sort of to close yourself up. But if you can sort of get yourself away from that and train yourself not to do it, then
absolutely, yeah, really important. Just before you go into an exam, an interview.
Well, hopefully we'll be seeing lots of students doing the superhero pose before their exams. That would be great, wouldn't it?
Brilliant.
I think we do have a question now, which is good, because I was sort of having to think
running
of
out, Jenny.
I was like, oh, I'll have to think of another one. So the question is, why do people automatically turn to negative thoughts as opposed to positive ones?
Okay, so our brain actually works on a system of threats and rewards. And we will always head towards a threat because that's survival instinct, unless we train it across to rewards, which is really interesting. But you can train your brain over to there's an awful lot as well that we haven't really talked about today, but of cognitive bias or thinking errors. There's a whole section in the book, and that happens because our brain works on a system of threats and rewards, so we're more likely to believe the negative. But also our brain gives more weight to any experience. So if we ask it to solve give an answer to something or make a decision, all it can go is on the information that's stored. So it selects what it thinks we require, but it gives more weight to anything that has an intense emotion attached to it. And sadly, most of us have more intense negative emotions attached than positive ones. So for those two reasons, it will pull us towards the negative unless we train it across to the positive. But we can do it.
That's true. Yeah, the 4 breath thing really got me, to be fair. I'm still kind of in shock of the fact that I can get back into a normal mode in just 4 breaths. That's helpful. And on that note, we've actually got another question from Claudia, which is are there any quick techniques like this to help with stress?
So all of the techniques that we've done today are absolutely to do with stress, but anything that you can do. So mindfulness, we always think mindfulness is attached to the breath, because we can only breathe in the present. That will bring us into the present moment. But actually, any of our senses will do the same. we can only see, smell, hear, touch and taste in the present. If I touch my arm on my hand, I can only experience that tingling in the present. So we use exercises that span all the senses, because some work better for others, and we work a lot with people with high level autism for whom concentrating on the breath is not necessarily a useful thing. So I would say, try and think about what senses work best for you. So for example, a very quick listening exercise, mindfulness exercise to bring down stress levels that I use a lot, is called circles of attention, and you just listen first for about half a minute to any noises from within your body, then inside the room, then outside the room, back inside the room, back inside your body. And that's a really quick and useful exercise. I did the image breathing one today because we use creativity a lot through the book, because we now know that if we can build neural pathways between our higher thinking brain and our neocortex, which is the home of most of our imagination, that's one of the best things we can do for good mental health. So anything creative that you can do will also, bring you into the moment. It's why, the mindfulness colouring books took off massively, didn't they, in the lockdown period. I would say if you like imagining, then there's some, go online, there's some great guided meditations that are brilliant and last only about sort of 1 or 2 minutes. And another of my favorites is called Foxhole in My Mind. And that's where you imagine a safe and beautiful place. And essentially, normally people do a trigger in and a trigger out, but you can, I have a friend who's a BBC producer who just does a raise of an eyebrow, so they don't know if she's doing it in a meeting. And the more you do it, the more you'll get practice of your brain taking you away from the stress and into that safe and beautiful place. Just for, you probably only need to do it for sort of 40 seconds or so. But I can't do this, but there are people who can bring down their cortisol level in under a second with Foxhole. Yeah.
Beth, do you want to talk about now? Because I find that one really useful and helpful.
Oh, thank you, Andy. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so this is I don't know how I didn't think of this. Thank you so much, Andy. So notice, observe and wonder. So now is a mnemonic. So N stands for notice, O stands for observe, and W stands for wonder. So, you can look around the room and just find something to notice. So I'm looking at a little statue of Buddha over in the distance, and you're just going to observe it for about 6 or 8 seconds in detail, the colors, the shapes, the textures. So the observing is what's bringing you into the moment. And then the W stands for wonder. And that can be wonder as in, wow, isn't that an amazing statue? Or it can be, I wonder how that got back from wherever it was made. So it can be either sense of the word wonder. And like gratitude, your mind cannot experience wonder and anything negative at the same time. So yeah, it works in exactly the same way. So now literally takes about 10 seconds and you're there. Thank you, Andy.
Great before an exam, possibly,
yes,
just to calm.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Great before an exam. Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you, Andy. That was really good suggestion, because that's a perfect one, and like you said, so quick that you can do it anywhere.
Yeah.
I think that's I suppose those are the ones that are really useful, because if you are already in that stressful situation, all this groundwork hasn't been done, you're already at that point where your stress container is at 95% and rising. These are things that you can do to just really bring it down quite quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we talked earlier about sort of using adaptive behavior and changing everything up as much as you can. I would say, however, it's good to have 1 or 2 exercises that are your go-to exercises, because that, back to the default position, your brain will get there quicker. So I've done foxhole, for example, so quickly, so many times that I don't actually have to do the tap. I only need to get to there, and I'm in an underwater Egyptian city, you know. So I would say just have 1 or 2 exercises that, you know, that you use a lot, and then they'll start to work more and more quickly for you.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking about students during exam time. So I used to run, as part of the company that I used to run a campus bookshop, and students during exam time, just, it was like they weren't functioning on the same level as they usually were, because their brain was just so caught up in all that sort of, I suppose, that future, playing through the future of the exams, and have they revised enough, and so they were just forgetting everything. I think that, I mean, we always had a few cards left behind, but suddenly loads of them were being left behind. And I can remember speaking to a librarian saying that there's sort of students just stopping and sort of standing and talking to themselves in the library and things, because they were just so caught up in that sort of whole stress, because there's a lot of pressure when you're doing your exams, and it's your whole future almost that's, and it's not always productive stress, is it?
No, absolutely. You know, it is very, very hard not to put, you know, and I would say sleep is such an important thing, and we haven't really sort of talked very much about sleep, but you know, it's one of the things that really goes out the window, isn't it? When you're and it's a vicious circle again. You know, difficult sleep can lead to stress, and because you get stressed about not having slept, and then it goes round. But you know, a lot of the exercises that we've done today are really useful in terms of sleeping better. And I would say, you know, it's so important to get for mental health. So, you know, we now know that of the nutrition and exercise and sleep is the most important of that health trinity. Shakespeare called him chief nourisher in life's feast, didn't he? And we know now that that's actually true, and it's so important at exam times. You know, you will not, you know, be in the position to do your best, you know, if you aren't getting at least a reasonable amount of sleep. So, you know, prioritizing that and doing all that you can to make sure that you are in the best place when you do finally go to bed. You know, try and give yourself a little bit of space between when you finish working and you get into bed. If you have a hot bath, that your body temperature needs to drop 2 degrees before you sleep. So when you come out of a hot bath, your body temperature naturally drops 2 degrees. So, you know, that can help to get sleeping. But yeah, try and concentrate on the sleep as well. You can.
That was the part I struggled with, especially when I was writing my dissertation. I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh my God, I've passed my deadline. Excuse me. And I'd be like, wait, hold on, no, I've got 3 weeks left and it's the middle of the night. But it just ruined my sleep for the better part of 3 months. I think if I got 4 or 5 hours altogether, I'd be very lucky. But it was, I wish I'd known these techniques at that point.
And I would say as well, Siddharth, that it's, you know, in situations like that, it's worth just having, you know, if you know that's going to happen, accept that it's going to happen, you know, have a piece of paper by your bed. You know, if you wake up in that panic, write it down, and then you can let it go and go back to sleep, you know, rather than sit there and, you know, you're lying there and you're lying there. Just accept it's going to happen, have that 1 minute, and then try and get back to sleep as quickly as you can. Actually, you know, acceptance is, so I used to suffer from insomnia really quite desperately badly, and the turning around. So CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, is more prescribed now than any sleeping tablets, which is brilliant. The sleeping tablets are not great, and one of the most important things was literally just accepting. And you go, okay, I'm now accepting I sleep for 3 hours a night, and I'm going to make sure that in 3 months' time it's going to have got to 3.5, and then, you know, whatever month's time it's going to have got to 4, and just allow yourself that. And from the time that I absolutely accepted it, I added an hour and a half onto the sleep within a week and a bit, just because I'd accepted it. So, you know, we spend so much time fighting against ourselves, that acceptance is really important.
I think.
Brilliant.
We've had another question, just asking about the breathing exercise in managing stress, and they said, is breathing in and out through the nose more effective in calming down than breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth? So like, is the specific technique of breathing in through the nose and out the mouth important?
So in through the nose and out through the mouth is what will bring your heart rate down quickest. So and probably if you go just slightly, but not too much, slower than a normal breath. Yeah.
Perfect. It's probably worth mentioning that if anyone is wanting to do things like this or guided meditation, probably a lot of universities do host these things. I know that when I worked at Queen Mary University, they used to do in the chapel on campus every Wednesday, we used to go and do guided meditation. And
wow.
it was lovely to just go and sit there on some bean bags and someone take you through it. And I used to think, I'm too busy for this, I can't go. And then as soon as I went and put that time to one side, it was probably half an hour, and every time it made a difference. But probably most times I was going, before I went, like, this is silly, why am I going to this?
And I would say as a whole package, that's, when we go into businesses or whatever it is, or if I'm working in drama schools, it's always that, but we haven't got time. And it's just sort of explain, like we said, only 5% of our thoughts are spent on the task in hand. I know now that I get through so much more in a day than I ever dreamed possible. I would not have ever thought that was possible, a few years ago. And so I absolutely promise everybody that you will gain back more time than you spend doing it, because you are focusing your mind on the things that really need doing, and try to encourage that focus. So when I grew up, I was a terrible I've multitasking queen, and I think I dragged people screaming into multitasking for many years. But we now know that multitasking is not great for either performance or good mental health. We can't actually think about two things that need our focus at the same time. So every time you switch between the other, you get about a 35% drop in performance and a spike in cortisol. So, it's really worth trying to train yourself as much as you can to focus on one thing at a time.
That's a really good point, because I found during lockdown that I was doing multiple things at the same time, and I was just finishing the day feeling so drained mentally, because obviously I hadn't really been out doing much physically, doing that much stuff, but I was just so tired at the end of every day because I'd just been bouncing around and getting stressed about things.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think it's really worth trying to separate things. So, I'm lucky that the room that I'm in at the moment is quite big, but I have 3 separate stations, and then I move to another place I'm writing something at the moment. So, my writing desk is over there, and this is my working desk, and then I've got another space over there. It's really
that's really good. And I think with students as well, from having students working for me, we'd go through their timetable, and they would say, right, I'm free for this amount of time, and you say, okay, well, if you work all that and you're doing all those lectures and then you've got your homework to do, when do you have time to do anything else for yourself? When do you actually just stop and rest?
Yes.
They just hadn't thought about it at all. There's no downtime. They're just thinking about how they need to fill every space, and that's a productivity thing of I need to get this done, so let's fill up all the time. But actually just stopping and having a rest sometimes is important, isn't it?
You absolutely do. You need to give yourself the space to recover. Our brains are not meant to be on 24/7. We live in a world that's on 24/7, and it's not great. But give yourself as much downtime as you can.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just asking, just having a random chat with you now.
No, absolutely.
Everyone's just watching. But I mean, I think this is really important, because I think so many students, and they really care about making their degrees a success.
Yes.
Which is very important, but at the same time, you need to get through it yourself in a way that you can use for the future. So if you structure your time now and how you cope with things now, that's only going to make your future life easier, because you'll be able to cope with stressful situations, because unfortunately it doesn't the stress carries on coming after you've graduated.
Yes, it absolutely does. But it's really interesting. Andy, you don't by any chance have the buzz burden curve slide anywhere?
Hold on, I'll just see if I can locate it.
Andy's going to try and locate it, and I'll talk about it why. Because actually not all stress is bad stress, and we need some stress, but we have an optimal level of stress. And when you go past that stress into the area where it becomes eventually becomes damaging, what's really interesting is we don't realize that the standard of our work has gone down because of the way that we're feeling. So we work, for example, with quite a lot of comedians, and they never want to stop. They never want to give themselves time off, because they're on a roll and they're being creative. But by the time that they get past that kind of line of optimal performance, few degrees, they only think they're being funny. And and it's just the same with us when we're writing a book or doing our exams or whatever. It's very easy for us to believe that we're doing better work than we are when we're very tired or when we're stressed. And so actually stepping away is an important thing to do. You're much more likely, give yourself 10 minutes, go and do something else for 10 minutes, come back to it. You're much more likely to come back to a place where you're working at a better standard and not doing yourself harm. Any luck in finding it, Andy? Yeah.
I'm nearly there. Just keep talking, Phil.
I'm going to keep talking. So what is really interesting on the other side of it, so if we have too little stress, so this is burnout in the too much stress, but too little stress is called rust out. And sometimes students I know suffer from that in the summer holidays, or and when finals finish, oh my God, because we've got used to having that level of stress and pressure and all the purpose and meaning that goes with it, and suddenly that it's like when people retire and then they become ill very, very quickly, because suddenly there isn't anything important to get up for in the morning. So actually having, a certain amount of stress and pressure is really important, but recognizing when you're going past the point, see, marvelous. So on the screen there, the yellow and green over on the left-hand side is the rust out, where you haven't got enough. And if you look at sort of where performance is, it's very low. Then you've got peak performance in the middle. And then when you go past that and you're into the sort of fatigue and exhaustion and eventually burnout, but around this sort of level, a few degrees past into the red is where we think we're working much better than we actually are. So I would say, if you can always know where you are, like with the stress container, know where you are on that buzz burden curve, how far you are away from that line of peak performance, that's quite a skill. And going forward with your life, it's a definite advantage when you're competing with other people, because not many people will understand, what it takes to keep working at peak performance. So definitely useful. Thank you, Andy. Brilliant.
I knew it was somewhere, and it was just, and when you're looking for something, you can't find it. I'm going, no, surely it's there. And I found myself getting stressed. Just kidding.
Brilliant. Thank you.
That was really worth digging out though, because
it's brilliant, isn't it?
It's interesting to see it like that and realize how easy it is to just tip over. And if you can recognize those signs, then so really it's worth spending some time just thinking about, what do you feel like when you get past that and you go into the red? And if if you can't think about it for yourself, or you can't locate it, you almost certainly will have seen someone else go past that line. You will know what it looks like to watch someone cross that line. Really important. Some companies get us in, Jenny, just to keep their staff at peak performance. That's what we're there for them. Wow. Well, that sounds really good though, because like you said, if it's just 10 minutes of walking away and coming back with a fresh mind or something like that, it's all you need to do is recognize when it's happening. Yes, it's that. I say all, but no, it doesn't. 2 weeks probably you can recognize that, even a week.
You know, it's always about sort of gaining that awareness is the first level. That's the most important one. Yeah.
Wow. I think we've come to the end of the questions. So unless anyone has anything else, this is your last chance to pop something in the chat. But I think we've gone through pretty much most of the things that I had, the questions. I've got all of my questions answered as well, so this is great.
Brilliant.
But I don't know whether Siddharth, did you want to ask anything else?
Oh, I did have a few questions that got answered through the presentation itself, so I didn't even need to worry about bringing it up, but I think it was really helpful. I was furiously jotting down notes, which is why I was sometimes looking away, but I think I took a lot away from it. And yeah, thank you both very, very much for all the tips, all the tricks and all the help. We'll 100% be using it. And yes, if anyone did miss anything from this video, it is being live streamed to YouTube, so it'll be on our channel. You can go back, take a look at it, which I definitely will be again.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I'm still kind of in awe of everything at the moment.
Oh, lovely. Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for asking us.
Thank you. And we will be sending links out to all the videos. So
lovely.
Don't worry, everyone, you will get a link through and you can watch it as much as you need to. So we will end the webinar there. So just take this opportunity to say thank you to Beth and Andy again. It's been lovely to have you here, and to share that knowledge with everyone, I think, is really valuable. So thank you very much. Pleasure. And goodbye.
Oh, take care. See you again, hopefully.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.